Hey, StoryMakers! Welcome to StoryMakerland. I'm here with my friend, Dr. Kimball from Virginia Theological, and we are so excited to have you. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today.
It is totally my privilege. I am so excited. So thank you for having me.
Yay. Well, Lisa you run many things at
No, I think I do what people call manage up, or I sort of like in command, out of control is another favorite line. Like I'm supposed to be responsible for a lot of things, but it's because of the gifts of the people around me that they work at all. So yeah,
I feel the
curating
same.
capacity. That's my job.
Well, you are obviously a collaborator and bringer of people with lots of capacity and wonderful imaginations. Lisa, can you just share a little bit about what you do in your world and where Virginia Theological is?
Sure. People who've known me for a while would say I've said this for too long, but I call myself an accidental academic. I do have a PhD, which I guess puts me officially in that classification. And the story of how I got there is fascinating in and of itself. I'd always been curious about more education, and then life situation sort of catapulted me into that opportunity. And I even went into my doctoral program with no ambition per se to, quote, be in the academy. I just had this longing to learn and to backfill some of the things that I'd lived and wanted to understand better. And then by the grace of God was invited first to the University of Minnesota faculty, and then was sought out, to be honest, by Virginia Seminary and invited to apply for a position here. And I kept kind of scrunching my forehead and saying, "Are you sure? I'm not this, I'm not that, these other things." And they were convinced that I should at least come visit. So I did. And that was in 2009.
Wow.
I came out to visit and really came to be polite and say thank you, but no thank you. And the spirit being what the spirit is and God moving the way God moves, I got back on the plane to fly back to Minnesota, and I caught something. I wanted to be here. So I am now a full faculty member at Virginia Seminary. I am what's called the James Maxwell Professor for Lifelong Christian Formation. And that puts me in the area of practical theology, which is a wonderful field. And I work with colleagues across our other disciplines to support the learning of people in our seminary. And our seminary is primarily preparing people for ministry, primarily people who will be ordained in the Episcopal tradition, but not entirely. So we have people in MA programs, MDiv programs, and people in Doctor of Ministry programs. And I love it all. I really love it. And the more our students become diverse in many ways, backgrounds, theologically, ethnically, racially, culturally, geographically, we have a lot of international students, the more interesting the classrooms are. We're still primarily an in-person, on-campus instructional institution, although many of us do a lot of work online. But I see our mission as meeting the needs of the wider church as the landscape of what it means to be Christian and what it means to be a Christian leader changes dramatically. And this seminary is blessed with financial security that allows us to take some risk, but also be stable. And I feel very privileged to be in that spot. So I teach, I do research, I coordinate grants, and then I'm also the vice president for lifelong learning, which means I oversee a department of really capable people who are interested in ministry in the world and creating resources, curating resources, convening conversations for those of you out there trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus and do it where you are and live it faithfully. So
awesome.
The other thing I would say is I'm crazy about baptism. So my core thing is, how can I help you activate your baptism? That's really what gets me up in the morning.
That's amazing. Well, I love the title Lifelong Learning. It makes me think of two words, awe and curiosity. And Lisa, for so many of us who are grown-ups who are maybe parenting, or we are youth and family people, when you think about lifelong learning, what does that really mean in regard to like awe and curiosity, kind of maintaining that sort of fire in the process?
For me, it starts with our spiritual practices. It's not about a head. It's about a holistic understanding of our belovedness by God and the call on our particular lives for responding to that love, right? And I think it's really hard to do that if we don't know God or if we don't have room for God. So I think what keeps me excited about life, and the world right now is in a terrible place. There's so much pain and so much suffering and so much polarization and hatred and fear. And all I know how to do is to be even more committed to the faithfulness of one step at a time as a disciple of Jesus, right? That the local immediate things that I can influence are my own body, the care of this temple, and then the people I love and I encounter around me, and invite them to do the same. So my sense of all of that is our imagination is a gift from God, and it's an organ that we can exercise, but it takes practice, and the world often wants to crush it. So for me, that comes from creating space to be still, to notice, to be in wonder about creation around me, to be with people who are kind and caring and inspiring, and to say my prayers, to do that as faithfully and in whatever way I can. So as I get older, more and more, I think discernment is at the heart of my journey, and I hope the way I help others grow in their faith. But it feels to me like no matter how competent we are, no matter how skilled we are at anything, whether it's professional or our family life, we have to have a well of something to draw from, right? And God provides that, but we have to make time and space for it to continue to be filled. So it's obvious, but it's not rocket science, right? It's just hard. It's like saying you're going to go to the gym every day after 10 years, and most of us don't make it. What does it look like to build the muscles of listening to God and being still in the midst of all the demands and all the excitement and some of the fear and all of that? So.
Well, I just love that. I love that you pointed out that the imagination is an organ. We're always talking about the imagination in our world, Storymaker land. Walt Disney used to say that our imagination grows flabby over time. And I think that's true. And also at the same time, sometimes as grownups, and those of us maybe in ministry or maybe we're parenting older kids, our imaginations may be active, but maybe they're activated in sort of towards a negative, or we have forgotten that we all are lifelong learners and we are called to remain curious. And so I love that you called out that just that action of having rhythms. It's just, I feel the same way as I get older too. It's like, it's a necessary. It's not so much about like, I'm going to, do the thing, but it's like, well, if I don't do that, I'm going to be messed up for the rest of the day. We just need our minds reoriented over and over and over again. I think that's so wonderful.
Well, and if I can interrupt, I guess what I've learned more and more is our minds need to be reoriented, but that for me doesn't happen unless I let my body go there. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
It's sort of also the difference between, is conversion something that happens intellectually, or is it something that is different from that? And I would say it's bigger than that. People with cognitive differences can be faithful people and know God, but aren't going to have the same experience of that I do. But I guess more and more, it's like letting our bodies teach us what they need. And I don't mean that in a weird woo-woo way. But it's like if we just deny the health of our body, and whether that's sleep and water and walking or laughter and play, it's those things around the edges of our mind then being more active and more effective. So for me, there's a lot of goodness in lifelong learning that is formal instruction. Like, I want people to learn new ideas. I want people to learn new skills. I want people to take our courses, be part of the things that we do together. And I also believe that stuff sticks when we're really ready to learn it. And for me, the more I think about and experience life, the more I'm ready to learn intellectually, cognitively, all those ways, when I'm at peace, like when my body is as whole as it can be. So there's this very counter North American sort of empire-driven way of thinking about what it means to be human that is, I think, far more Christian if we are open to that.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the embodiment of story, and that that shapes us in so many ways. But those are kind of those places where it it's not so tangible to grasp exactly, right? And I love your touch on baptism, you know, getting access to what do those promises mean. And so Lisa, if you're thinking about, you know, how does that sort of interface with the embodiment of our faith, what does that look like for you? I was just curious when you were talking. I was like, well, what does that look like for Lisa? What does that look like for Lisa?
Yeah, no, the more I think about it and live it, I think of baptism as my superpower, right? That
Mm.
it's the call on my life that is like the roadmap I am following, the promises that were made. I was baptized as an infant, so it's not like I raised my hand and said, "Hey, me
Yeah.
too." So I've been living into all this, right? The way many of us do for decades. And what I'm feeling more and more is that those promises are really radical. They're really countercultural. They
Yes.
turn the world upside down. So what does it look like for me? It looks like, we always default to respect the dignity of every human being. Well, that's hard, right? For me to respect the dignity of all of our political leaders right now, that's really hard.
Yeah.
So I have to pray hard and be deliberate about not adding to the vitriol, right? The first
Mm.
things I can do are concrete behavior checks, right? I can maybe not love in an overt way because I still struggle with that, right? But I cannot hurt, I cannot damage, I cannot pile on. I can do things that are very noticeable if we're quietly doing them when we all begin to live more carefully. Um, I think my baptismal vows are indeed what give me courage to take
Mm.
some risk, to push against systems of oppression or systems that um, have historically eliminated or marginalized people. As a white woman with a lot of privilege
Mm.
and a lot of like years now under my belt, I have this privilege of being able to leverage some power, right? And what can I do to help people have access to resources that I could have taken for granted? So my baptism is always checking me
Mm.
and helping me be serious about this life of being a Christian in this world. Is we are very much in this world, but we're not of this world. And so I need to be willing to take those risks. And I go back to those vows. I go back to the creed. I go back to these crazy things we say we believe and keep working at what does that mean?
You know, when we give talks or we're in trainings, we talk about assess and confess, and sort of identifying our own personal pain points. And I love that whole, like, looking backwards is sort of the future. Like, you can't really move into the future without looking back into the promises of what the baptism really means for us. I think it's such a gift. When in the formation world, I feel the tendency to sort of be very hyper focused on the kids or teens or the audience we're called to, but oftentimes we forget about the process for ourselves and that what that embodiment means for us, and then everything pours out of that. One of the things I wanted to talk to Lisa today was about being nimble and true to self, and it seems to me that, you know, baptism is married into that true self. What would you say about being nimble in the process of, for your own personal life, maybe as a youth and family person, and maybe for your kids, like having that spirit of being nimble and flexible?
Couple thoughts. Henry Nouwen years ago wrote or said, "My job is the interruptions,"
Ooh, I love
and I love that idea. That I don't really know what exactly God wants me to do at any given time. I've got a plan for X hour or the day, and then
that.
these things happen, right? And in my experience of ministry and in my experience of being nimble or ultimately responding nimbly, it's because things get interrupted, right? It's my plan is not necessarily the whole idea. And so I delight in that. Now I think some temperaments don't delight in interruption. I mostly do, to the point that I also have to be disciplined about not always letting myself be interrupted. But I think there's grace in interruption.
Mm.
It disturbs, it shakes up, it makes us re-examine, it makes us notice, right? So the whole idea of being nimble to me is we can only be nimble, I think, when we're actually deeply rooted.
Mm.
Otherwise, what could be read as nimble is just reactive, right? It's just sort of zipping around in response to whatever stimuli are coming. I think being truly nimble as a Christian, especially as a Christian leader, as a parent, is because we have a taproot, right? We have a grounded rootedness. And it's a little, what are those things called that are inflated, that are outside car dealerships, you know, when they
Yeah, but those balloon
right.
people
I mean, whatever they're called, right? They
replace the sign people. Now
right.
they've got
And
the
so,
balloons. Yeah.
you know, they blow around and they flip flop and they do, but you know they're tied down, right? And if they're
Yeah,
not,
they're not
they
going
lose
anywhere.
not only their shape, they literally just float off and crush, right? They don't exist without being rooted. And so there's something about that image, like the air is God, but I am, you know, my life maybe is the fabric, right? It's
Yeah.
and I don't always know what angle or position I'm going to be in, but I'm always rooted. So I also think my rule of life has served me well. I've had a rule of life for years, the same one, which is show up, listen, tell the truth.
Oh, I love that.
And
Can you say that again, Lisa?
show up,
Show up.
listen, tell the truth.
Mm.
And I can riff on all three of those at some length, but each of them is both literal and metaphorical, right? And so in showing up, I need to be attentive to my environment and to my tradition and to my relationships and to my baptism. And right, there's a showing up with being present, and bringing all that is into awareness. But it's only when I've done that, then the other things can unfold. And so that helps me a lot, because if I'm showing up as well as I know how into my daily life, then I can listen more deeply. And that means observing. It's not just ears, right?
Yeah.
Noticing the things that then jostle me to be more nimble. And then the speaking the truth piece comes with integrity. It comes with some relational trust that I will have established because I've shown up and I've hung around and I've been there over time or in context. So that rhythm prepares me, I think, better, not perfectly, but better to respond to what God is inviting in a given moment. And so for me to be nimble means noticing that someone else has a good idea, or there are gifts present that we could invite to participate in something, that there's an opportunity that we should notice or respond to. So it's about, again, kind of my practice, my rootedness, I hope, and then getting out of the way to let the Spirit lead.
I love that. You know, having emotional availability and presence to people requires that rootedness, right? So I just love that. Like, that's if everyone take that away with you, because I think sometimes we get so worked up in ministry of like, I have this idea, we're going to do this whole thing, the kids are going to respond, my teens are going to respond in a certain way, and oftentimes having that practice really creates that availability, which really is so meaningful. And when you think back to your own life experience, and teachers that had impact, it's like they stopped, right? They were interrupted, and they allowed for that connection to happen when you needed it most.
Right.
And so I think that's an incredible takeaway for all of us. Lisa, as we kind of wrap and think about what's ahead, I'm super curious, and I wanted to know, like, what was your favorite childhood story as a kid? What grabbed you, your heart, maybe your imagination? It doesn't have to be from the Bible. For me, it's always Roald Dahl, but and there's others.
Right. I think it's my personality type. I have a hard time with favorites. Like I just get a cluster of all these things. But it's interesting. One of the childhood books that I loved and read and reread was a book called Bridie of the Grand Canyon.
Oh,
It's about a donkey or a mule that was in the service of giving people rides down the Grand Canyon and back up, right?
Yes.
And I don't know what it is about that story. I haven't reread it in years. I need to find a copy of it and do that. But the visuals of it, the art of it, the grandeur of the Grand Canyon always captivated me. And I think there was something about sort of the anthropomorphism, right, of the animal. The animal was the character in the story that let me recognize sort of how much more there was to life than the obvious, like that there's a whole world of imagination and story. And I just loved it. Like this was, you know, she was the hero, or he, I guess it was a he. But it was just this very powerful story for me about adventure and journey and the unlikely things that unfold and what you learn from that. And I've always loved the outdoors. So I think that was a part of it, that it was bigger than I had ever seen. And yet it was something I wanted to see. Right. I think about the stories I think about quickly when you say they all had animals in them. So I love Stuart Little. I loved Winnie the Pooh. Now I grew up in England, so Winnie the Pooh was a fixture. Paddington Bear, like all these sort of critters doing things that were fun. And I'm old enough that I was reading them. We weren't watching TV shows about them.
No, I mean, Beatrice Potter.
Oh,
fascinating. I get.
Yeah. So, you know, The Secret Garden, which is less about animals, but, you know, all of these sort of magical kingdoms, in a way, were a big part of my childhood. And I think I was also an only child and in a very happy home. But I think a lot of my childhood was being among adults, right? I had that sort of premature adult conversation going on because everybody was grown up around me, mostly. And so when I went to these books as a child, it was really fun. I had this world of peers, kind of, you know, who just were playful, and it felt great to just be able to visit there and then go back and talk to mom in the kitchen or dad, you know, working on something, you know, around the house.
That reminds me of Madeline Leigh-Engel. Just she was an only child, so she created worlds.
That's right.
You know, magical places.
Yeah. In fact, when I first read her, and then met her, I had that same affinity with her for that. Yeah.
So amazing. Well, that's a fun fact. Well, that's fantastic, Lisa. You know, as we sort of wrap up, you know, we're in this lifelong learning process, and I'm always reading things and being captured by new ideas. And I think it's so important to share knowledge and books and resources. So I asked Lisa before we got on today, so do you have a book that you would recommend or something you're really thinking about, like in this moment, that would be great for all of us to read too?
I actually am going to sneak in two. If you haven't read Picking Up the Pieces, Leadership After Empire, I highly recommend it. It's a book about gospel-based leadership and how counter to the dominant models of leadership, which are very hierarchical, the gospel actually is. And I think it's really inspiring. So that's a good one. It's been around for a little bit, but it's really worth reading. And then a newer book that one of my colleagues here at Virginia Seminary wrote, my colleague Ross Kane, who's an ethicist and a priest, and was a parish priest for quite a while before he came sort of full-time into teaching, runs our doctoral program. He's just a wonderful human being. He wrote a book called Good News of Church Politics. So first of all, you don't associate good news with church politics very much.
Yeah.
But he wrote it and it just came out, and he wrote it very consciously thinking about the climate we're in as a country and what will happen in November, or is beginning to build up already. And it's really lovely. It's practical. It's designed for congregations. It's designed for people on the ground to think differently about what does it mean to be a political people and to be faithful to that. And where is the good news in it? So it's not partisan. It's not saying go out and vote for X or Y party, but it's very much saying take your political posture as a Christian seriously and understand what that looks like and where the joy can be in that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, those are two.
Well, I can't wait to dig into those. Lisa, I have a book to share for you. I don't know if you've read this yet, but have you read Your Brain on Art?
I've seen it. No, I haven't. Is it good?
Okay, we're going to send it to you.
I love it.
That's an amazing book, and I highly recommend it. And then there's another book called The Creative Act, A Way of Being. So I don't know if you've read that. That's Rick Rubin. And as we've been in conversation, I just kept thinking Rick Rubin. Oh, yeah, boom, 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 boom.
Love it. Okay.
I just, you can tell Lisa and I are curious minds, and we're always learning.
I know. Well, my only problem is time, right? I want like an extra 8 hours to read at the end of a day before
I know.
the rest of the world will be silent. So I'm not falling behind. Yeah.
I know. I feel that so much. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for your time with us today and sharing so much wisdom. And we cannot wait to share your story with our story makers. So lots of love. And if you want to learn more about what Lisa's up to, do you have a URL or where should they go, Lisa?
I think the best thing to do is to go to our lifelong learning website here at Virginia Seminary. And I know that'll be in the notes from the podcast. It's kind of the landing page for all the things we do, the grants we're doing, the projects we have. We have just a lot of different programming. I don't keep a personal website. I just kind of contribute to all of that. So
yeah, and building faith is there too as well, right?
Building Faith is there, and the Forma network is there, which is the Christian Formation Network that we support, and just a number of other initiatives that we have for leaders and for just curious Christians, people who want to learn and want to be in community.
Well, I mean, the reality is none of us are meant to do this alone, and having curiosity and diversity, and we just grow all together. And so, thank you so much for shepherding that and inviting us into that world. So,
well, we would love to hear from you too. We'd love to encourage your stories in our work. So, anyone who reads this, watches this, listens to this, let us know what you need, and if we can help, we would love to do that. So, awesome. Thanks, Mel. This was great.
Yay! Thanks. Bye.
Bye.